Good morning, everybody, and hello, folks on the web. And if you people by the door, who I can barely see now, want to sit down, there are plenty of seats over on the far side, so you can swim across. I won't be able to see you. Right. Frank, thank you very much for the invitation to come. And my brief today is to speak about open access, which is a little bit of a double-edged sword. It's something I'm really excited about and responsible for at Elsevier, and we're doing a lot in that area. But it slightly can reinforce the misimpression that we're backwards looking, because open access in some ways has been the debate and the dialogue of the last 10 years. Really, we're getting into it now and figuring out how to make it work in practice and at scale. And that's what I'll be talking about today. But that means I'm not able to talk about all the other interesting touch points I think we probably share with people in this audience. We're doing a lot of work around OERs and MOOCs, about open data, open linked data, altmetrics, text and data mining, all sorts of kinds of publishing innovations. But just wanted to leave you with that. It's not that we're not aware of those things and actively engaged. It's just that I'm sticking to my knitting today. So I assume that this is familiar with most of the audience, but I don't want to over-assume. So just some basic definitions. Essentially, open access is in academic research and scholarly communication the equivalent of what has happened in other areas of our creative industries and dialogue, like open source software, open data, open educational resources, etc. And it's part of a broader social change, I think. An interest in democratizing knowledge, in opening up communications and sharing more broadly. And this is one of the ways it comes to rest in an academic community. Basically, it's the idea that research content, starting with journals, but broadening out to books and so forth, should be free at the point of use. There should be no access barriers. That content should swish around very effortlessly around the web. And one of the very interesting things in this space is that perhaps the technology isn't the problem. It's some other sorts of fundamental things, business models being one of them. So there are two basic business models that are currently used for open access to make journal literature freely available. And they go by these colors. Gold open access, the idea that the author or funder will pay a fee upfront to cover the cost of publication. And as a result, then, the content will be freely available to everyone. And the second model, which goes by the name of green, continues to rely on subscriptions, libraries and others subscribing to the content, but a version of the article being made freely available online through a repository or another website or sharing site at some point in time. Often those are drafts that are made available, final drafts, peer-reviewed drafts, but a version, not the final version of the article. And often there can be a period of delay, an embargo period, before that content is freely available in order to give the subscription model a little time to work. Now, this is quite interesting, actually. Business models don't interest everybody. I'm not sure they interest me entirely. But it's quite a different sort of set of business models that are emerging in open access than we've seen in other parts of the creative world. Open source software, if you think about it, initially, it started out that you would give away the software for free, but perhaps you'd recover your costs through consultancy or implementation or tailoring. That's not a business model that so far has established itself in this space. With legal publishing, open legal information, often produced by the public through public funds, and the models that work there are often that content is made freely available to everyone, and it's published multiple times by multiple service providers who compete on the basis of those services. Again, academia is a little bit different, because generally when you're publishing a research article, you want that to appear once, because it's registering that you've made a unique and novel contribution to the intellectual record. And the intellectual record that scholarship is based on is building up over time. So you want people to find and cite that version of the article. So business models, I think these two work. They can work at scale. But the kind of interesting cutting edge, I think, I'll come back to this at the end, is what kinds of enabling technologies might enable us to move to new business models to underpin open access. So, key drivers. There's a lot of open access advocacy around the world. Week after next is Global Open Access Week, and we'll see a lot of examples in the UK and abroad of that advocacy in action. But I think the other key drivers are that it often resonates with researchers' own value sets. There are beliefs that it is a moral obligation, that we're not only communicating with each other in the research community, but we want to reach out to a wider public, that we want everybody to be able to access and engage with this kind of intellectual content. There can also be kind of more radical motivations for change. Sometimes people perceive that the current scholarly communication system is unfair for certain of the players in it, authors or libraries, et cetera, and that can be a driver for change. And there can be some perceptions of benefit for the author in changing the way that they share. For example, there's a perception of higher citations if you disseminate in this way. I say perception. We don't actually, I think, have solid evidence of that, but it's possible that that will come in time. And there's a widespread perception that open access can be a way of communicating that can lead to the faster advancement of science. And what we're seeing is that policymakers, funding bodies, governments, universities, and other research institutions are putting their weight and influence and power behind this shift to help drive it. They're providing enabling funds to enable authors to publish through a gold open access model. They're investing in infrastructure, like institutional repositories, to enable certain kinds of sharing to take place. So just quickly, what we're doing, I think we are sometimes not perceived as an open access publisher, but we have been radically accelerating our engagement with these models over the last 3 years. So we are launching an open access journal roughly every week at the minute. We have 56 so far, and we host 91 others for other publishers. We have over 1,600 hybrid open access titles, which enable authors to choose whether they're going to publish gold open access or through the subscription model. And we have agreements with funding bodies and other policymakers around the world. We also have, I think it's 97 titles now that offer delayed access, which means that the content is sold through subscriptions but made freely available to everyone after an embargo period of a year or so. And we have policies that permit posting and sharing on different sorts of platforms. Now, a question that I get asked an awful lot is, okay, when's the tipping point coming? We've seen the Finch report. We've got the RCUK policy. The Wellcome Trust has long been behind this model. Is 2014 the year when most content becomes published in journals that are open access? And what we're seeing is a steady growth in open access models and the percentage of journal content that is published in those ways. But we're also continuing to see a steady growth in subscription content, the stuff funded by libraries. And this can create quite a challenge because it means the costs for both types of content are continuing to grow with volume. And I thought I would spend just a little bit of time talking about that because it seems a bit counterintuitive, actually. So, publishers and librarians around the world collectively handle an incredible scale of research information each year. And I'm just talking about academic publications. So 3 million journal articles are submitted every year. We handle collectively across the industry, not just in my company, but across the industry, relationships with over 300,000 peer reviewers, and a subset of the submitted articles are published. Many others are refined and might be resubmitted and published in the future. We have 30 million people who are downloading and actively using journal content already. And we have tens of millions of citations, references back to that literature that take place. What we also see is that globally, at government level, research is seen as a hugely important driver for economic growth and for the advancement of our species, to solve species-threatening, Earth-threatening issues that face us collectively. And so what we also see is that for decades now, there has been a continuing commitment to invest in research and development, even in tough economic times. And the global investment in higher education, research, and development consistently outpaces GDP growth. This is all based on data from the OECD. Investment in higher education, research, and development fuels increases in numbers of researchers, and that research activity, those researchers, continue to publish more and more articles. So while open access articles are growing, we are also continuing to see subscription articles grow. And this is a collective, shared challenge. It's difficult for libraries, publishers, universities, and funders to find scalable, economic, creative, interesting ways to disseminate effortlessly, to pick up on Nicola's brilliant word, valuable research data in ways that are efficient for researchers and teachers and students and others. What we're also seeing are some big global changes in where research is being done. The global gross expenditure on research and development has been around 2 to 2.5% of global GDP for some time now. But in developed countries like ours, that's been relatively flat. In emerging markets, Brazil, India, China, we are seeing a steady increase in the amount of GDP devoted to R&D. And this trajectory is continuing. There will be changes in the numbers of researchers in different parts of the globe, and in which countries are research exporters and which are research importers. And that's important when you start talking about open access, because a business model that's based on research-intensive institutions and individuals funding the scholarly communication system, the costs are largely borne by those research-intensive places, which are research exporters. And that may change over time. It's a global conversation that's needed about how to make that work. There are also 4 things that continue to enhance the value of research information, of the stuff that's published in journals. And I'll go through each of these very quickly. First is that research is increasingly interdisciplinary. Now, I don't have a lot of time to explain this kind of mind-numbing slide, but it's cool if we did have time to talk about it. But basically, the colors around the outside of this circle are different subject areas. This is a research map for China, showing by these little gray dots the subjects in which Chinese researchers and universities are particularly strong. Relatively little going on here in the social sciences and humanities at an international publishing level, but very, very, very strong indeed in engineering, math science, computer sciences, chemistry, for example. But what's kind of interesting is that these little colored lines inside of each of the gray boxes, those indicate the proportion of articles in that little research area that are actually crossovers with other disciplines. What I should have really done is brought along the UK map. With the UK map, you'd see many more of those little lines. We have much more interdisciplinary research going on here than at present we're seeing in some of those emerging markets, but it's likely that that will change over time, and that through using tools like this to drive research intelligence, there'll be more investment in increasing the interdisciplinarity of global research. The second thing is that collaboration is important and it works. So this is a little diagram comparing China to the UK. The purple dots, is showing articles that are co-authored by international researchers. So researchers from more than 2 countries, from 2 or more countries. The little blue dots here and here are articles that are co-authored by researchers within one country, but from at least 2 institutions. And the little black dots are articles that are authored by people within one single institution, but maybe from different departments. And you see some interesting things. First of all, in China, a much higher percentage of articles are still produced quite locally, in stark contrast to what's going on here in the UK, where the majority of our articles are internationally co-authored. The other interesting thing you see is that the impact factor, the citations, for articles that are internationally co-authored is much, much higher. I think I'm missing the number here. Let me see. Citations impact factor 2 times higher in the UK for internationally co-authored articles. You see the benefit even more in China, where you get 3.1 times the number of references back, greater awareness of those articles. And again, we'll see these trends continuing to grow internationally. The third thing we see, I've already actually discussed this a little bit, but the growing proportion of research content that is coming from the emerging countries. China, India, Brazil, South Korea, quickly, collectively overtaking the US in terms of an exporter of content. And finally, last but definitely not least, data. Full text in journal articles is important, but data is even more important. And what we find consistently when we survey researchers is that they rate research articles, the content of research articles, as both very high in importance for them and also very highly available to them already. But research data down here, high importance, low availability. And by working through policies and incentives for encouraging researchers to share and cross-reference and reuse data, we will be helping to advance science even further. So this is a really hugely exciting area, I think, for research and for teaching. So let's bring it back to open access for just a minute. Oops. Not that quickly, though. The UK is taking a leadership position in this space with the Finch Group, a collection of stakeholders drawn from libraries, universities, funders, government departments, publishers, and learned societies, having set a course for managed transition to open access publishing over the next 5 to 10 years. And a commitment, basically, to working together to effect that change. And I think it will take time. There's a lot of devil in the detail. Even if you completely are motivated and switched on by the idea that all research content will be freely available to everyone and will flow easily and seamlessly around the web, it actually takes some time and effort and energy and real investment to make that work at scale. And there are a lot of issues and challenges to work through, and it will take that collaboration and goodwill. So a few of the issues that we remain to, I think, tackle. In the gold open access space, huge challenge with licensing terms. Some OA advocates would like all content to be made available under the Creative Commons Attribution License. And what we're finding is that many researchers, for a variety of reasons, will choose other license frameworks, other Creative Commons licenses to make their content available. So what we're likely to see is perhaps not a homogenization where all content is freely available under a single license type, but we're going to see a plethora of content made available, different platforms, different times, different ways, different versions under different licenses. And I'm not sure that we yet have the technical infrastructure to deal with that and to provide effortless researcher and personal services to make that content usable, easily discoverable, tailored into teaching resources, et cetera. It's a huge technology challenge here. And the list goes on around pricing, whether we will post green open access articles or link to them, what sort of services we'll build over the top to make them usable. Again, versions, who does the deposit and linking, who funds this, When is the content available, et cetera, et cetera. So the last point I had on this slide is infrastructure and interoperability. Not the sexiest tech words you will ever hear, and certainly not the sexiest you will hear today in this kind of exciting forum, but really critically important to making open access work at scale. We've got a lot of additional complexity coming into the system, and we don't yet have the models and systems to make that work. Business models, let's think about that again as well. At the minute, we're stuck with an author pays or funder pays vision for open access publishing funding. But if there was much richer infrastructure for micropayments and tracking rights and licensing and permission at a micro scale, and this is in its infancy, then we could have a much broader array and spectrum of business models underpinning the expansion of open access. So we have to overcome together those kinds of technical challenges in order to free up the system, I think, to change in the way that there is consensus it will change. Given I've had 15 seconds left, I'm not going to spend any time on this slide, but just to draw your attention to the URL, this is an example of a collaborative service that's emerging in the open access space to perhaps facilitate linking to manuscripts rather than needing to host them locally in repositories. It's quite a new thing that's emerging. And my final slide is, I think, an important one. A transition to open access, working out all of these interesting details, keeping us all harmonious and sane in the process will take time and flexibility. There's no silver bullet or panacea. And that means because access to information is so critically important, we have to figure out ways to provide that access in the interim. There are already article rental services, Deep Dive, for example, which is like a Spotify or an iTunes for research content, where you can rent journal articles for 99 cents and look at those for 24 hours or buy other sorts of access packages. I think that's really important for providing public access during this transition. There are a variety of philanthropic access programs as well. Research for Life, where hundreds of publishers work with UN agencies to provide free access to journal literature in 106 of the least developed countries. The point is open access is coming. We're all working on this together, but it's not easy. It's not going to be quick. We have to make it work at scale in sensible ways, and we need to fill access gaps in the interim. It's a polytheistic access movement, I think, not a monotheistic one. Thank you very much.
Thank you.